Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next chapter in our series of aquaculture-related webinars, designed to bring together science and business to expand and strengthen the United States aquaculture industry. These webinars are a joint effort between the National Aquaculture Association, the North Central Regional Aquaculture Center, and the United States Aquaculture Society. Whether you're currently engaged in aquaculture, looking to get into business, an educator helping others understand aquaculture, or just want to become a better educated consumer, we hope these webinars will enhance your knowledge and move you forward on your journey to success. Today's webinar is entitled The HACCP Approach to Prevent the Spread of Aquatic Invasive Species by Aquaculture and Baitfish Operations, and will be presented by Dr. Ron Kinnunen, an extension educator with Michigan Sea Grant. Ron works with coastal communities and businesses in the Upper Peninsula to apply science-based knowledge to address Great Lakes issues. Ron has a BS and an MS from Michigan State University and a PhD from Michigan Technical University, and has generated numerous publications through his participation on a wide range of aquatic research issues. Ron is here to help us understand the importance of aquatic invasive species and how to make small changes in our operations that will make our nation's aquaculture industry more resilient against potential invasive species. And don't forget to tune in at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on September 21st when Linda Oderno will talk about the retail and food service side of the seafood industry. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ron.
All right, let's get ready with this is the HACCP approach to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species by aquaculture and baitfish operations. Some of the problems are with aquatic invasive species. They can invade and disrupt baitfish and aquaculture operations. And these same operations have been identified as pathways for the spread of aquatic invasive species. And many times areas are closed to harvest and culture, and also impose regulations that may be disruptive to the industry. Farmers can adopt a variety of practices to prevent the introduction or unintentional distribution of native species, such as active farm management, and cultivate productive and helpful partnerships, know and monitor state and federal regulations, periodically check the external and internal boundaries of your farm, create and maintain redundant barriers to entering or leaving your farm. These are biosecurity measures. Eliminate escape opportunities during live transport, and create a proactive preventative on-farm program such as HACCP, or join a fee-based program such as the Safe Bait Fish program. And for example, the Arkansas freshwater baitfish farmers created a voluntary fee-supported program that includes farm testing and inspection to achieve state certification that their fish are free of important aquatic nuisance species, free of the most feared fish diseases. They are farm-raised and no fish are collected from the wild. The same program, the farms are required to have rigorous semi-annual testing for disease by independent veterinarian, oversees the collection process, and ensures delivery to USDA certified laboratory. Program standards includes the disease testing laboratory has to meet rigorous national and international standards. The farms must follow stringent biosecurity requirements that prevent the introduction of diseases and other unwanted organisms. The Arkansas Department of Agriculture conducts on-site inspections to ensure that the farm is in compliance and that no exotic species are present. Again, be knowledgeable and cultivate productive and helpful partnerships. And you can do this working with your aquaculture extension specialists, your regulatory agency, whether it's agriculture or natural resources, and state or national aquaculture trade associations. If we look at aquaculture, how can it be characterized by risk? Again, it's an extremely diverse and complex as agriculture, and it's characterized by production systems, the product types, the water source, and the species. And each of these components pose different risks for spreading aquatic invasive species. Again, we can look at the different product types. Food, which would probably be very low, and then we can look at baitfish, especially if it's collected from the wild, it can be a lot higher risk. We look at baitfish wild harvest. This includes like shiners, suckers, chubs, dace, which are very common wild harvest in the Great Lakes region. Semi-aquaculture, again, suckers, fathead minnows, softshell crayfish. Also, a lot of the wild harvest that comes out of the Great Lakes, it's held for a lengthy time over the winter months, so that's also looked at as semi-aquaculture, even though they're caught in the wild. And then we can look at aquaculture, such as golden shiners, fatheads, rosy reds, and goldfish. A lot of this occurs in the south, such as Arkansas, and a lot of this is imported into the Great Lakes region. The water sources, like springs and well water, these are more secure. They're not going to contain aquatic invasive species as compared to surface water, which is a little bit more riskier, which can actually pose a higher risk. If we look at AIS Risk and Aquaculture, the vast majority of aquaculture poses very little risk for the spread of aquatic invasive species because they raise fish for the food market, and these usually go in as dead fish. They use well or spring water, which don't contain aquatic invasive species. They don't harvest fish from infested waters, and they use closed systems. Higher risk is from baitfish harvested from AIS infested waters, fish for stocking taken from aquatic invasive species infested waters, AIS cultured for live sale, AIS grown where they can escape into the wild, and surface waters used or transferred with live bait. Okay, what do we want in aquaculture? We want to prevent aquatic invasive species from establishing reproducing populations. We want to balance resource protection with potential negative economic impacts. So how do we allay the concerns that aquaculture might spread AIS? We must have a policy and procedures in place to deal with concerns. The procedures must be robust enough to work for a variety of aquaculture and baitfish operations. Must have records that will show that the policies and procedures are being followed, they're working, and must verify that the policies and procedures work. But again, these procedures should be as unobtrusive as possible. And again, you can see a cartoon here. Kinnan and Gunderson. Jeff Gunderson was with Minnesota Sea Grant when we developed this program through a project through the Great Lakes Sea Grant Network. And you can see in the cartoon here, as we approach the fish farm, we would like to try out a few procedures on your department before we use them to mess up the entire company. So, but anyway, we work very closely with the industries as we developed this program. And it was a good venture as we developed here in the Great Lakes region. It was actually adopted in other places throughout the United States. If we look at the 7 principles of HACCP, the first one is conduct a hazard analysis. And basically, this is basically a flow diagram of the aquaculture or baitfish operation. So you look at all the steps that encompass your operation. And then you can identify critical control points where you may be able to take some type of action to prevent the spread of an aquatic invasive species further down into the other steps. You establish control measures at that point. You monitor each of these critical control points, and then you establish corrective actions to be taken when a problem occurs. And then you can establish a record-keeping system and verify that the HACCP plan and control measures work. If we look at the hazards, and you can see on the bottom the hazards for the seafood safety industry. When we developed this program, Jeff Gunderson and I actually were HACCP trained for the seafood industry. It was an FDA program, and the hazards in that were biological, such as viruses and bacteria, chemicals such as, say, aquaculture drugs, and physical could be like metal fragments coming off of processing equipment in a fish processing facility. So what we did, and we developed the AIS-HACCP program for aquatic invasive species for use in the aquaculture and baitfish industries, we developed the hazards. And the first one here you see is AIS fish and other vertebrates. Some of the examples there are like round goby, rough. Some of the invertebrates include zebra mussels, spiny and fishhook water fleas. Some of the AIS plants include Eurasian water milfoil, hydrilla, and the diseases such as Whirling's disease, bacterial kidney disease, and viral hemorrhagic septicemia. When we looked at developing this program, this Baitfish HACCP project, we had 3 different approaches that we took. The first one was to establish a HACCP program. And what we did is apply the hazard analysis and critical control points, and successfully used by the seafood industry to assure the safe product. We actually applied the same thing to when we started working with the bait industry to look at these critical control points. We identified critical control points in the baitfish chain of commerce, discovered ways to reduce the risk of moving aquatic invasive species, and we looked at this from harvest all the way to the retail shop where the recreational fishermen buys their bait. We identified critical control points and points of risk throughout commerce. We established critical limits. We actually looked at bycatch percent. A lot of these, again, were non-target species. They weren't exactly aquatic invasive species. We did draft monitoring strategies needed to keep an eye on success over time. We conducted workshops with bait harvesters, wholesalers, and dealers so they understood the risk and the safety steps to take. The Minnesota part of the project worked with private and public sector stocking operations. They began writing a draft HACCP plan, and most operators were taking some type of action to prevent contamination. They looked at safer farm practices. What was going on in Minnesota, they used ground or spring water or sand filters. They used clean brood fish sources, routinely inspect for aquatic invasive species. They cleaned and dried all equipment, isolated equipment used in infested waters, so it's not used in uninfested waters. And again, do not take water from unknown sources. As part of the Michigan part of the project, we looked at how many commercial harvesters we have. And our harvesters, like I said earlier, they do a lot of harvest off our Great Lakes in Michigan. How many types of harvest? What are the critical control points? And how can we best reach bait harvesters with an education or program once the HACCP plan is complete? What we did is we tried to identify critical control points in the wild chain of commerce to reduce the risk of moving aquatic invasive species to uninfested waters. We tried to understand the process of wild baitfish harvest. And you can see in these slides here, this is some channel harvest in some of the big rivers that flow into the Great Lakes. You can see some of the seining that was going on. We're actually breaking the ice in these channels here, these tributaries, to seine baitfish. A lot of these baitfish congregate in these areas, especially in the month of December. Again, we're looking at all the processes going on from seine, moving the bait from the seine into the holding tanks, all the way to the transport trucks. Again, showing you some of the movement of the bait from the transport trucks into the baitfish operations. Some of the things we did when we were working with the bait industry, we want to make sure, look at separating boats and equipment. A lot of this involved tagging boats that are, so they can be used separately from infested areas to uninfested areas. And again, return from pond to harvest, and a lot of equipment that could be used like pressure washing traps. Traps can be exposed to sunlight for a day or two to make sure everything dries off. So if there's any aquatic invasive species, they can be killed. Again, drying nets such as these fike nets here. Separate waders for some ponds. Also, a lot of these waders and equipment, even on indoors, there's a lot of separation in these holding facilities inside the facility, so they're kept separate with different lots of fish. Also keeping harvest and transaction records, lot numbers, where the fish were harvested, where they're moving. Holding tanks. And some facilities also actually have barriers between these holding tanks, especially if they're dealing with separate lots of fish coming out of different areas. Grading is an important thing. because it's shown that these grading methods, if some of the aquatic invasive species we find in the Great Lakes, like rough and gobies, they can be graded out very easily. So the fish are graded at a variety of different steps in these operations. This shows you an example of an operation that I worked with in Michigan. It's called Michigan Bait. They're in Lansing, Michigan. They allowed me to share their HACCP plan here. And you can see some of the procedure flows here. You can see the procedure flows that they use here. They look at all the steps that they use, from harvesting in the Great Lakes all the way to bringing these baitfish into their operation. And again, you can look at some of the hazards that were identified in this operation. The fish and invertebrates here, the examples were gobies, Eurasian rough and white perch. The invertebrates included zebra and quagga mussels, spiny water fleas, fish hook water fleas. Invasive plants included Eurasian water milfoil and purple loosestrife. And these fish were actually harvested out of a known area for viral hemorrhagic septicemia. So actually, these fish actually have to all be tested too before they can be used. They have to get clean certification that they're free of VHS. This shows you a hazard analysis worksheet. First 3 steps here. And whenever they identify, you can see here in the right-hand column, you can see there in the bottom right-hand box, there's a couple of yeses that are identified. Anytime you identify a yes in a hazard analysis, those steps are actually entered into what are called a HACCP plan. And here's what a HACCP plan looks like. And you can see the first 2 critical control steps in this operation are observe targeted baitfish for any external signs of a disease and check for other AIS. And then the second one, if a targeted baitfish appear normal, begin seining. So again, you can see these are 2 critical control points. And what you do with each of these critical control points, you identify the hazards, the limits for each control, the monitoring, the corrective actions, the verification, and the records that are going to be used. In conclusion, with HACCP, we felt that the HACCP approach can work as long as there are commitments from personnel in the field as well as management. We think that the HACCP approach can replace more intrusive impacts that may result from unnecessary, ineffective, or unenforceable regulations. Control measures and corrective actions must be developed, and they must be AIS specific. And it is in the best interest of the public hatchery manager, fish farmer, bait harvesters, resource managers, researchers, and enforcement officers to prevent the spread of AIS. This is what we developed when we developed the AIS-HACCP program. We have the manual you'll see on the left there. We use these in our day-long training sessions. That's the curriculum. We have a CD, has a variety of resources, a lot of the PowerPoints that we use in the curriculum, and we developed the curriculum. The curriculum's actually in a PDF file. There's PDF file fact sheets in there on different aquatic invasive species. And then we also have a video. We also have that now in DVD version from net to sale. There's also, when we worked with this, we had AIS-HACCP outreach materials that were used in retail stores, and where the retails could give like a sticker there. You see on the left where recreational fishers could put it on their buckets, reminding them not to dispose of these minnows in the water when they're through using them. And then again, in the bait shops, you can help. You see the help sign there. Again, that's one last chance to look for any invasive species before it enters into the recreational fishery. We also hosted some regional workshops with major support from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. You can see on the map there. There was also state involvement, public and private hatchery involvement. So the project, when we developed it, actually got farther than the Great Lakes. It actually went national, working with state and federal hatcheries. So a lot of the training that they've adopted with AIS-HACCP, they're using it in their systems now too. So it's not just the private bait fish and aquaculture, but it's also federal and state, and also tribal hatcheries. Part 2 of the Sea Grant project, we wanted to assess the level of AIS contamination at retail outlets in the Great Lakes region. And what we did throughout the Great Lakes network we wanted to see how this program was working, so we purchased and analyzed bait for AIS, such as plants, fish, and macroinvertebrates. We purchased minnow samples from retail outlets in Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio, covering the Great Lakes, Hudson, and Mississippi Basin watersheds from 98 to 2000. And at least 3 dozen baitfish of each species carried by the store were purchased and identified to species. And samples were inspected for fish, plants, and invertebrates, both AIS and non-target species. The holding tanks were also observed for any visible AIS, and AIS and non-target species found in samples were retained for reference. You can see some of the different species that were used or what we found in each state. There's some of these species that are used more in some states than other states. Among these baitfish species, the gold shiner usually comes from aquaculture operations in the south, such as Arkansas, and also in the Great Lakes region. By far, most of our fatheads are imported from down in that region too. The other most frequently are wild harvested, and the good news is that no samples purchased in any state contained any AIS fishes, although alewives were observed in a tank in one Ohio shop. And alewives is basically an invasive fish that came into the Great Lakes when the sea lamprey made it into the Great Lakes. And basically it's a major forage fish that's used to sustain the salmon fishery in the Great Lakes. And also no samples were found to contain nuisance plants such as Eurasian milfoil. So again, we did a good check of to make sure that the AIS-HACCP program was working. And so that was good news that we weren't finding any of these AIS species finding their way into the retail shops. Part 3 of the project, we wanted to assess angler attitudes towards AIS and exotic-free bait. We wanted to assess the risk spread posed by anglers and conduct face-to-face angler surveys around the basin. What we did find in the angler surveys, one thing that they did mention is that they would be willing to pay maybe $1 more per dozen for bait if it was AIS free. So they indicated they would be willing to pay more. We also have some other good news. Recent Michigan Department of Natural Resource baitfish inspections, 36 out of 37 wholesale minnow dealers, 60 of 88 minnow catchers in Michigan, and 152 out of the 675 minnow retailers, and also 2 non-resident wholesale trucks. Like I said, we do import a lot of bait into the state, into the Great Lakes region that comes especially from the south. And the good news is they did not observe any aquatic invasive species. Another project that we're working on with AIS-HACCP right now, we're looking at a third-party verification program for AIS-HACCP. And what we're doing right now, and this project started last year, it's going to go in through this year, is we want to develop review teams consisting of representatives from aquaculture extension and management agencies and review AIS-HACCP programs at aquaculture and baitfish operations. And what we're looking at and what we started is pilot programs in Michigan and Minnesota. We actually identified a couple of businesses, one in Michigan and one in the state of Minnesota, that are working with us, and they're part of the program. And so this program is actually funded through, we got a grant through the state of Michigan, through our Michigan Department of Agriculture. And basically, Michigan Sea Grant's involved with this, along with Chris Weeks with the North Central Regional Aquaculture Center. Chris also has an appointment at Michigan State University, an extension appointment, and also Nick Phelps at the University of Minnesota. So again, this program's underway, and we're going to be continuing it on to the fall and then make some evaluation how this pilot program goes, and maybe it could be expanded farther into the region.
Thank you, everyone, for coming in.
All right, thank you.